You've given us quite the intellectual workout this time. A fascinating stack of excerpts from Sigmund Freud's The Interpretation of Dreams.
Indeed. Yeah, we're diving into selections primarily from the editions published in 1908 and 1911.
Okay.
So they offer a glimpse into how Freud's thinking refined itself after that initial groundbreaking publication back in 1899.
Right.
It's a chance to trace, the early evolution of his revolutionary ideas.
Okay, let's unpack this. For anyone joining us who might be newer to this, the core idea Freud put forward is that our dreams aren't just random brain activity.
Mm-hmm.
He believed they have meaning, a hidden language that can be, well, interpreted.
Yeah.
A pretty radical concept for its time, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And the mission for this deep dive is to really get to the heart of Freud's initial understanding of these nightly mental voyages.
Right.
What did he identify as the wellsprings of our dreams? What significance did he believe they held? We're aiming to uncover the foundational layers of his psychoanalytic approach to the dream world.
Exactly. We want to give you a solid grasp of those early theories to understand what Freud thought was truly going on when our conscious minds take a nightly pause.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fascinating look at the very bedrock of psychoanalysis. So, where does one even begin to approach such a monumental work?
Well, Freud starts by setting the stage, kind of contrasting the dominant views of his era with those that held sway in the ancient world.
Okay.
Understanding this shift in perspective is really key to appreciating his contribution.
Right. So in ancient times, dreams were often seen as messages from the divine. Yeah, a direct line to the gods.
Precisely. Before thinkers like Aristotle, dreams weren't generally considered a product of the individual's own mind.
Hmm.
They were seen more as divine communications. And there was this important distinction drawn between true or valuable dreams.
Right, the useful ones.
Believed to be sent as warnings or prophecies, and then the vain, fraudulent, or empty dreams considered, deceptive.
It's that age-old idea of sorting the genuine from the false, the meaningful from the meaningless.
Exactly. And as Freud points out, this pre-scientific understanding aligns perfectly with the ancient worldview.
Right.
Which tended to project inner psychological realities onto the external world. Within that framework, it was, a perfectly logical explanation.
And then, as scientific inquiry began to take hold, these views started to change. What were some of the emerging ideas in Freud's time regarding the nature of dreams?
Well, the overwhelming trend among thinkers in Freud's era was towards understanding dreams as originating within the dreamer's own mind.
Okay.
It was a fundamental shift from an external, divine source to an internal, psychological one.
So the late 19th century scientific consensus was leaning away from Zeus sending me dream study tips.
Yeah, that would be the general idea. Instead, the focus turned to how our waking lives and the experiences we accumulate shape the content of our dreams.
And Freud references several individuals who contributed to this line of thinking, figures like Hafner, Weygand, Maury, and Jessen, if I remember correctly.
Yes, these authors all stressed the strong connection between our dreams and our recent conscious thoughts and experiences. Hafner, for instance, famously stated that dreams are a continuation of the waking state, always finding a link to ideas that have recently occupied our minds.
Right.
It's like our daytime thoughts are still echoing as we sleep.
That resonates with the feeling of sometimes dreaming about exactly what you were working on right before bed.
Precisely. Weygand even directly challenged an earlier notion by Burdach, suggesting that the majority of dreams actually pull us back into the realm of everyday life, rather than offering an escape from it.
So that intense conversation you had with your colleague might very well replay in your dream later that night.
Exactly. And Maury offers this concise summary. We dream of what we have seen, said, desired, or done.
Simple enough.
Yeah. And Justin takes it a step further, suggesting that the specific content of our dreams is shaped by a wide range of individual factors: our personality, our age, our gender, our social standing, education, habits, and the entire collection of events and experiences that make up our past life. It's a very comprehensive view of the internal influences.
So it's not just about the immediate past, but the entire history of who you are that can color your dreamscape.
Precisely. And then Freud delves into how even immediate physical sensations we experience during sleep can find their way into the narratives of our dreams.
Ah, okay.
It's quite fascinating how our bodies can speak to our sleeping minds.
Oh, like that well-known example of dreaming you're lost in the desert, when in reality you're just really parched.
Precisely. And Freud brings in some compelling historical anecdotes to illustrate this. Jérôme de Buzareng, for instance, conducted these small, almost scientific experiments on himself.
Oh, yeah?
He reported that when he left his knee uncovered, he would dream of traveling in a cold mail coach.
Huh. Cold knee, cold coach.
Right. Similarly, when he left the back of his head exposed, he dreamed of participating in a religious ceremony outdoors where heads were traditionally uncovered.
That's pretty convincing evidence for the idea that external physical stimuli can directly influence the content of our dreams.
It is. And there's also the account of Napoleon I, who, while sleeping in a carriage, was awakened by a nearby explosion.
Whoa.
This real-world event immediately triggered a dream about a past military campaign involving bombardments. He even woke up shouting a military command.
Wow.
It's a remarkable illustration of how quickly and directly sensory input can translate into a relevant dream scenario.
Wow, that's a really direct and dramatic link. The external sensation almost instantly became a core part of the dream narrative.
It highlights the powerful connection between our senses and the sleeping mind.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's Maury's incredibly famous guillotine dream.
Right.
A truly visceral example.
Oh, that one sounds intense. Could you describe it for us?
So Maury was ill and in bed, his mother tending to him. He dreamt of the French Revolution's reign of terror. He witnessed numerous terrible murders, and then he himself was brought before the Revolutionary Tribunal. He saw all the key figures, Robespierre, Marat, the whole cast.
Jeez.
He was sentenced to death, led to the scaffold, the executioner tied him down, and then the blade of the guillotine fell.
That sounds terrifying.
Absolutely. He vividly felt his head being severed and woke up in, intense anxiety, only to discover that the top piece of his bed had fallen down and struck his neck.
No way.
Yeah, in the exact same way the guillotine blade would have. It's a truly striking instance of an external stimulus, the falling bed frame not just being incorporated, but completely shaping a very vivid and dramatic dream narrative.
Wow.
It's as if his brain took that physical sensation and constructed this elaborate, terrifying story around it.
That's an absolutely visceral example of how our sleeping minds can weave external events into the fabric of our dreams.
Mm-hmm.
But Freud also explored the idea that sources internal to our own bodies can also play a role, right?
Yes, the realm of organic physical excitations. Think about how maybe a stomach ache might subtly influence the tone or imagery of your dreams.
Exactly. Freud points out that our internal organs, which we are typically unaware of in our waking hours, can become sources of sensation, even pain, when they are excited or diseased.
Mm-hmm.
He brings in Strumpel, who proposed that during sleep, our minds become much more tuned to the sensations emanating from our bodies.
Right.
Receiving and being influenced by stimuli from parts we usually don't notice when awake. It's like our internal landscape becomes more prominent when our external senses are less engaged.
So those little bodily signals during the night might get translated into dream content.
Precisely. Even Aristotle, centuries before Freud, suggested that dreams might actually alert us to the initial stages of illnesses that we haven't yet consciously noticed.
Really?
Yeah, because the dream exaggerates these subtle physical impressions. Some medical writers, even though skeptical of dream prophecy, acknowledge this potential for dreams to foreshadow physical ailments.
That's an interesting perspective. Are dreams acting as an early warning system for our health?
It's a viewpoint that has echoed through history in various forms. Now, shifting our focus again, Freud discusses those recurring typical dreams that so many people experience.
Ah, yes.
Such as falling, losing teeth, flying, or being naked in public. It's quite remarkable how universal these themes seem to be.
Yeah, it feels like almost everyone has had at least one of those. What explanations were offered for these common dream themes at the time?
Well, some researchers attempted to provide purely physiological explanations. For instance, the dream of being naked was sometimes attributed to the sensation of throwing off the bed covers.
Ah, feeling exposed.
Exactly, and feeling exposed to the cooler air. The dream of losing teeth was linked to actual dental irritation.
Dental irritation leading to a dream of your teeth falling out. That sounds a bit, simplistic, doesn't it?
Freud certainly thought so. And the flying dream, according to Strumpel, was supposedly the mind's interpretation of the rising and falling movements of the lungs.
The lungs.
Yeah, after the skin sensation on the chest became less sensitive, creating a feeling akin to levitation.
Huh.
Falling dreams were attributed to a sudden relaxation of a limb, causing a change in skin pressure that the mind then psychically embodies as the sensation of falling. These explanations feel very mechanical.
Yeah, mechanical is a good word, focusing solely on the physical trigger.
They do sound very mechanistic, almost reducing these complex dream experiences to mere physical reflexes.
Precisely. Freud himself points out the limitations of these purely physical explanations. He felt they selectively dismissed or emphasized organic sensations just to fit a predetermined explanation.
Right.
He promises to revisit these typical dreams later in his work, offering his own, more psychologically grounded perspective.
Which I imagine involves much more than just physical sensations.
Absolutely. Following this, Freud delves into the ongoing debate surrounding the psychic factor in dreams versus the purely physiological.
Okay.
It's the question of the role our minds, our thoughts, and our emotions play in shaping our dream world.
So the internal landscape versus just the external and physical.
Exactly. Freud notes that many authors of his time, including prominent figures like Wundt, Weygand, and Tissier, tended to minimize the significance of the psychic element.
Really?
Yeah, often proposing that sensory stimuli were the primary, if not the exclusive, source of our dreams. They discuss the idea of association dreams, where one idea simply triggers another based on past connections.
But Freud clearly wasn't entirely convinced by that explanation.
No, he wasn't. He highlights the persistent doubt even among these authors as to whether these so-called association dreams truly arise without any underlying psychic impetus. The very definition of a pure association dream seemed to remain elusive. For example, Volkelt described them as lacking a solid core, characterized by loose groupings of ideas,
Right.
driven by aimless shifts and confusion, no longer held together by meaningful psychological stimuli.
Sounds a bit like a jumbled mess.
Indeed. Wundt even attempted to argue that dream images weren't genuine hallucinations, but rather illusions stemming from faint sensory impressions that never fully disappear during sleep.
Okay.
Weygand concurred and generalized this, stating that a sensory stimulus is the initial source of all dream images, to which associative connections are subsequently added.
So the psychic part just tacks on later.
That was the idea. Tissier went even further, asserting that dreams originating purely from psychic activities simply don't exist,
Wow.
and that the thoughts in our dreams originate from external sources. It was a rather strong dismissal of the inner world's creative power during sleep.
That's a pretty significant downplaying of the mind's active role in dreaming.
It is, but then Freud brings in the insightful observations of the earlier thinker Burdach,
Okay.
who offers a more nuanced understanding of the sleeping mind's relationship with the external world.
What was Burdach's perspective?
Burdach argued that sleep isn't simply the absence of sensory input, but rather a lack of interest in that input.
Lack of interest. That's different.
Yeah. He even suggested that a certain level of sensory stimulation is actually necessary to quiet the mind and facilitate sleep.
Really? Like background noise?
Exactly. He used the compelling examples of a miller who can only fall asleep to the sound of his mill's machinery, or an individual who requires a nightlight to feel secure enough to drift off.
Right.
It highlights how our minds can actively engage with and even depend on certain sensory inputs for sleep.
That's a really interesting point. It's not just about the absence of external stimuli, but about the mind's selective engagement and filtering process.
Exactly. And then Freud discusses the Marquis of Hervey. His views were sharply contested by Mare.
Okay.
But Freud clearly found him to offer a valuable perspective that challenged this underestimation of psychic capacity in dreams.
What was Hervey's main argument?
According to Mare's account, Hervey believed that our intellect retains its full capacity for action and attention even during sleep.
The mind stays sharp, basically.
Yeah. He viewed sleep primarily as a blockage of the senses, a shutting off from the external world. So, in his view, a sleeping person wasn't fundamentally different from someone daydreaming with their senses temporarily disabled. The key distinction was that in the dreamer, the thought takes on a visible, almost tangible form, indistinguishable from a sensation caused by external objects.
So memories feel real.
Exactly. Memories acquire the vividness and immediacy of present reality.
So the mind remains active, just processing information in a more visual and seemingly real way.
Precisely. And this leads Freud to include this beautiful quote about the genius of the dream.
Oh, yeah.
It really captures the remarkable nature of our sleeping minds.
Oh, please do share that.
Well, it speaks to the profound emotions, the clear insights, the sharp observations, and the quick wit that can emerge in our dreams.
Qualities we might not always see when we're awake.
Exactly. Qualities we might modestly deny, consistently possessing in our waking lives. The dream, according to this view, possesses a wonderful poetry, excellent allegory, incomparable humor, charming irony.
Wow.
It has the capacity to idealize the world in a unique way and reveal a deep understanding of underlying essence.
That's a truly eloquent way of describing the power and complexity of dreams. It certainly elevates them beyond mere random neural firings.
It does indeed, and it naturally leads to the idea that dreams can actually unveil hidden aspects of our psychic life.
Yeah.
Suppressed desires, our real nature, aspects we might not consciously acknowledge or express when awake.
Interesting.
Hildebrand even viewed the dream as a moral guardian, alerting us to the moral ravages in the soul, much like a physician might diagnose a physical ailment.
So dreams is a kind of internal compass, pointing towards aspects of ourselves we might be ignoring.
In a sense, yes, highlighting facets of our inner world that we might not consciously confront. This then sets the stage for a comparison between different theories regarding the nature of psychic activity during sleep.
The contrasting ideas of diminished versus altered activity, correct?
Some theories, which Freud rather aptly compares to a dementia model, propose a reduction in overall psychic activity during sleep.
Like the brain powering down.
Yeah, a weakening of connections and a scarcity of available mental resources. Other theories, the paranoia model, suggest not a decrease, but a different kind of psychic activity taking place.
And Freud's perspective aligns more with the altered activity view, it seems.
He critiques the notion of partial wakefulness as a satisfactory explanation. He echoes Burdach's earlier objection that it doesn't truly account for either the waking or the sleeping state,
Right.
and that irregular mental activity is a feature of our entire lives, not just sleep.
So it's not as simple as saying some parts of our brain are awake while others are asleep during dreaming.
Not in a clear-cut, compartmentalized way. Then Freud introduces Robert's incomplete impressions theory,
Okay.
which offers another perspective on what triggers our dreams.
What's the core idea behind that theory?
Robert proposed that dreams are sparked by unresolved or fleeting sensory impressions from the previous day.
The little things.
Yeah, those little bits of experience that didn't get fully processed or integrated into our conscious understanding. He argued that matters we fully dealt with are less likely to appear in our dreams. It's the loose ends, the fleeting sensations that tend to find their way into our sleeping thoughts.
So that random snippet of a conversation you overheard might be more likely to surface in a dream than a major life decision you've been actively wrestling with.
According to Robert's theory, yes, because the significant event is likely fully settled in your mind, whereas the fleeting impression hasn't been properly registered or processed. Freud himself notes that this theory effectively explains the frequent occurrence of seemingly insignificant daily events in our dreams.
Interesting. And then there's Scherner and his ideas about the role of symbolism in dreams.
Yes, Scherner didn't attribute a specific practical function to dream symbolism. He viewed the psyche as essentially playing with the sensory stimuli available during sleep.
Playing.
Yeah, through the use of symbolism, even if that symbolism appeared arbitrary or nonsensical.
Playing. Like the unconscious mind is engaging in some kind of symbolic free association.
Something along those lines. Freud acknowledges that Scherner's theory might initially seem somewhat fanciful.
Yeah, a bit out there maybe.
And perhaps deviate from a strictly scientific approach. However, he cautions against immediately dismissing it.
Okay.
Especially considering that it originated from someone who meticulously observed his own dreams and seemed particularly adept at exploring these more obscure psychic phenomena.
Right.
Freud also observes that the very act of attempting to explain the often bizarre nature of dreams can sometimes lead to seemingly fantastical interpretations.
So there might be something of value in Scherner's ideas, even if they seem a bit out there at first glance.
Freud suggests that there might be an underlying reality to Scherner's observations, even if it doesn't represent a complete and universally applicable dream theory.
So-
He sees it as representing one end of the spectrum in the ongoing discussion about how to interpret dreams.
Okay, so we've moved from divine messages to random neural activity to connections with our waking lives and even this idea of symbolic play. What about the relationship between dreams and mental or psychological disturbances?
That's a critically important area. Freud points out that even in the early days of exploring dreams, connections were being drawn between the characteristics of dream life and the experiences of individuals with psychotic conditions.
Right.
Maury credited Cubanus as being among the first to highlight this link, followed by other thinkers like Laloute and Maine de Biron.
And the comparisons that were made were quite striking, weren't they?
Absolutely. Kant famously stated, "The lunatic is a dreamer in the waking state."
Wow.
Krauss described insanity as a dream with the senses awake. Schopenhauer famously termed the dream a short insanity and insanity a long dream.
That's quite a link.
Yeah, and Wundt even observed that we can experience almost all the symptoms found in mental institutions within the confines of our dreams.
That's a powerful parallel to draw. It suggests that perhaps the very mechanisms at play in our dreams, when they become persistent or disordered in waking life, might contribute to mental disturbance.
It certainly raises that fundamental question about the relationship between our sleeping and waking mental states. Now, shifting gears slightly, Freud introduces the thoughts of Schiller.
Schiller, the poet.
Yeah, and his perspective on the creative mind. It might seem like an unexpected turn, but there's a fascinating connection.
What's the link between creativity and the world of dreams?
Schiller, in a letter, discusses how, for a truly original and creative idea to emerge, the watchers from the gates of intelligence, our conscious, critical faculties need to temporarily withdraw.
Let the ideas flow.
Exactly, allowing a rush of ideas to flow freely. Only then can these raw ideas be reviewed and critically examined. He even suggests that those who are primarily critical often fear the temporary madness that is inherent in all creative endeavors.
So a relaxation of our conscious control is a necessary step in the creative process.
That's Schiller's proposition. And Freud draws a parallel between this state and the state of mind we experience when dreaming.
Oh, okay.
This withdrawal of the watchers, leading to a state of uncritical self-observation. He even notes that his patients and he himself can achieve a similar state with relative ease, particularly when engaged in writing down thoughts without immediate judgment.
That's an intriguing parallel. Dreams as a kind of fertile ground for unfiltered ideas, much like the initial stages of creative thought. Now, of course, we can't delve into Freud without touching upon his own extensive self-analysis.
Oh, definitely.
And the famously analyzed dream of Irma's injection.
Absolutely central to the development of his theories. He doesn't provide a full reanalysis here, as he dedicated significant space to it earlier in the book.
Right.
However, he alludes to it again in the context of how dreams handle either-or scenarios in our thoughts.
Okay.
He also briefly mentions how recent events in his life and his own personal associations played a significant role in shaping that particular dream.
It's almost as if his own dream life became his personal research laboratory.
Precisely. And from this deep exploration, one of the most fundamental principles of his dream theory emerges: the concept of wish fulfillment.
Ah, yes.
It's the cornerstone upon which much of his interpretation rests.
Ah, yes. The often debated idea that dreams, at their core, are about fulfilling our desires. Could you give us some of the initial examples he uses to illustrate this concept?
He uses a very straightforward physiological example. If he consumes salty food in the evening, it naturally leads to thirst during the night.
Makes sense.
And he then dreams of drinking water. The dream, in this case, serves to fulfill the physical need created by the thirst, potentially allowing him to continue sleeping undisturbed. He refers to this as a dream of convenience. It's a very direct form of wish fulfillment.
That makes intuitive sense. Your body has a need, and your brain creates a scenario in your dream where that need is met.
Exactly. And he also highlights the often transparent, wish-fulfilling nature of young children's dreams.
Okay.
He recounts a dream of his 5-year-old son who was disappointed during a family trip because he didn't get to see the Dockstein Mountain up close.
Oh.
The very next morning, the boy excitedly reported dreaming that they were at the Simony Hut, which is high up on the Dockstein. The dream directly compensated for the unfulfilled wish of the previous day.
So for children, dreams can often be like a direct wish hotline.
Often much more transparent and less disguised than the dreams of adults. But as we know, adult dreams aren't always so clear-cut. Sometimes the wish fulfillment is hidden or disguised, right?
The famous concept of dream disfigurement, how does that process work?
Freud explains that sometimes the underlying wish fulfillment isn't obvious and can even manifest in the dream as something that appears to be the complete opposite of the wish.
Like an anti-wish.
Kind of. He provides the example of a patient who dreamt of traveling with her mother-in-law to their summer resort, even though in her waking life she had actively avoided doing so.
Okay.
The interpretation here was that her real unconscious wish was for Freud to be incorrect in his interpretation of a previous issue. And the dream presented the fulfillment of this wish by depicting the opposite of what she consciously desired.
So the dream is essentially saying, see, you were wrong, as a way of fulfilling the underlying wish to invalidate Freud's earlier point. It's quite a clever, albeit indirect, way for the unconscious to express itself.
It is. He also uses the example of a patient who dreamt of being unable to host a supper party for a friend, even though the friend had previously expressed a desire to gain weight.
Okay.
The interpretation revealed that the patient actually wished her friend wouldn't gain weight. And the dream fulfilled this wish by depicting the cancellation of the supper. The specific detail of smoked salmon in the dream, her friend's favorite dish, further supported this interpretation.
Wow.
It's as if the unconscious is using these seemingly random details to hint at the hidden wish.
It's like the unconscious is playing a game of symbolic charades with us.
In a way, yes. And this leads to Freud's introduction of the concept of a censor at work within our mind.
The censor.
Distorting the true, often unacceptable wishes to make them more palatable to our conscious awareness, and thus allowing them to surface in our dreams without causing us to wake up in distress.
That makes a lot of sense. You wouldn't necessarily want to have a dream that explicitly lays bare all your potentially dark or socially unacceptable desires.
Yeah.
The censor acts as a kind of internal editor.
Precisely. He even revisits those typical dreams we discussed earlier, suggesting that even seemingly negative or unpleasant dreams,
Like death dreams.
yeah, such as the death of a loved one, can be interpreted as forms of wish fulfillment when subjected to deeper analysis.
Really? How?
He gives the intriguing example of an intelligent jurist who dreamt of being arrested for infanticide after a night spent with a married woman.
Whoa. Okay.
The dream, as disturbing as it sounds, was interpreted as a wishful reassurance that no child had been conceived as a result of that encounter.
Whoa, that's a rather dark and unexpected twist on the idea of wish fulfillment. The relief of something not happening manifesting as this very disturbing scenario.
It truly highlights the intricate and often in indirect ways in which our unconscious wishes can find expression in our dreams. He then returns to the importance of the previous day's experiences.
The day residue stuff.
Exactly. Even those that seem trivial or insignificant as potential sources for the elements that appear in our dreams, referencing his own detailed dream journal to illustrate this point.
So that fleeting image you saw or a random comment you overheard during the day could become a key ingredient in your dream narrative that night.
Exactly. And dreams can also bring together and fuse multiple seemingly unrelated experiences from the preceding day into a single, often coherent narrative. Driven by an impulse to fashion a whole out of them, it's like our sleeping mind is trying to weave together all the disparate threads of our daily experiences.
Even if they don't logically connect.
Right, even if they don't have a logical connection in our waking thoughts.
Like your brain is attempting to create a unified story from all the fragmented moments of your day, even if the plot doesn't quite make sense on the surface.
Precisely. And Freud also touches upon the significant mental processing and consolidation of memories that can occur unconsciously during sleep.
The sleep on it idea.
Exactly. He even alludes to the common saying about sleeping on it before making an important decision, suggesting an intuitive understanding of this unconscious mental work.
It's as if your brain continues to work on problems and integrate information in the background while you're asleep.
Indeed. And then he raises a crucial question. If these seemingly indifferent impressions from the day only find their way into our dreams if they are recent, how do elements from much earlier periods in our lives, even those that seem to have little emotional significance at the time, end up appearing in our dreams?
The long-forgotten memory suddenly resurfacing in a dream.
Exactly. He provides a compelling example of a man who dreamt of putting on his heavy winter overcoat in cold weather. Seems ordinary, right?
Yeah, pretty mundane.
However, through analysis, a connection was revealed to a secret the man had learned the previous day about a condom bursting.
Whoa.
Linking the seemingly innocuous thick overcoat to the idea of reliable contraception and the terrible feeling in the dream to the potential unwanted consequences.
So a seemingly random detail in the dream can act as a key, unlocking a much deeper and more significant meaning rooted in recent experience.
Precisely. And this leads to the important understanding that the content of our dreams can also originate from experiences in our early childhood.
Really? Even forgotten stuff.
Yeah, even those that seem to have been completely forgotten by our conscious mind. He mentioned the example of a physician who had a recurring and vivid dream of a yellow lion.
A yellow lion.
Yeah, a dream that dated back to his earliest childhood and turned out to be a long-forgotten porcelain toy he once owned.
That's quite remarkable. A dream acting as a direct pathway to unlocking a memory that had been lost for decades.
It truly highlights the enduring and often profound impact of our early childhood experiences on our unconscious mind. And it's not just the content of dreams that can originate in childhood.
What else?
The underlying wishes that drive our dreams can also have their roots in those early years.
So those fundamental childhood desires don't simply vanish as we grow older. They might just go underground and then resurface in our adult dreams in disguised forms.
Exactly. Following this, Freud briefly introduces the complex processes of dream work,
Right.
specifically condensation and displacement, which are the primary mechanisms by which the unconscious mind transforms the underlying dream thoughts into the manifest dream content that we actually experience.
The dream we remember.
Right, or forget upon waking. He promises to elaborate on these crucial processes in more detail later in his work.
So there's a whole intricate translation process happening beneath the surface of our dreams.
Absolutely. And then he introduces a truly pivotal idea, the concept of the dream as the guardian of sleep.
The guardian of sleep.
Yeah, it's a key function that Freud attributes to our nocturnal mental activity.
How does the dream act as a guardian of sleep?
Freud proposes that one of the primary purposes of dreaming is to allow us to continue sleeping despite the presence of disturbing stimuli.
Like noises or being uncomfortable.
Exactly. Whether they are external sounds or internal bodily sensations, the dream achieves this by either ignoring these disturbances, denying their significance, or, most interestingly, by reinterpreting them in a way that ultimately fulfills an unconscious wish, and thus doesn't necessitate waking up.
So instead of being jolted awake by a noise outside, your dream might weave that sound into its narrative in a way that isn't threatening, allowing you to remain asleep.
Precisely. The dream actively attempts to neutralize these potential sleep disruptors by integrating them into a wish-fulfilling scenario. This leads us directly to the concept of symbolism in dreams.
Ah, yes, the symbolic language of the unconscious mind.
Freud provides a basic example of an embarrassment dream being connected to discarded bed covers.
Feeling exposed again.
Right, the feeling of exposure in the dream symbolically representing the actual physical lack of covering. He also touches upon more complex and often culturally shared sexual symbolism that appears in dreams,
Okay.
such as in exhibitionistic dreams and in the delusions of paranoia.
So, seemingly ordinary objects or everyday scenarios in our dreams can often carry hidden sexual meanings that we are not consciously aware of.
Often, yes. He then discusses the psychoanalytic principle of interpreting dream elements that occur close together in the dream narrative as being psychologically linked.
In the underlying thoughts.
Exactly, both within a single dream and across a series of dreams. It's like looking for patterns and connections between adjacent images or events to uncover a hidden associative pathway in the unconscious.
Like the unconscious follows its own particular train of thought, and the different elements in the dream are like significant stops along that mental route.
And precisely. This leads into a discussion about the appearance of children's hostile impulses and even death wishes in their dreams.
Oh, right.
This can be a somewhat unsettling topic, but Freud offers important context.
That does sound a bit disturbing on the surface.
Freud points out that while young children might certainly experience negative feelings or even aggressive impulses towards siblings,
Yeah.
their understanding of being dead is developmentally different from that of an adult.
Okay.
They often lack a full grasp of the permanence and the associated fear that death holds for adults. Therefore, these kinds of wishes expressed in children's dreams might not carry the same weight or intent.
Wow.
It's more akin to a childish desire for a rival to simply disappear or be removed from the immediate situation.
It's more like a transient wish for a change in the immediate dynamics, lacking the adult understanding of mortality.
Something along those lines, yeah. Lacking the full comprehension of the finality of death. Then, of course, he introduces the concept of the Oedipus complex,
Ah, the big one.
one of the most well-known and debated aspects of psychoanalytic theory. How does this fundamental concept manifest itself in our dreams?
A cornerstone of psychoanalytic thought. How does the Oedipus complex find its way into our dream world?
Freud uses the ancient Greek myth of Oedipus, who unknowingly killed his father and married his mother, as a powerful and enduring example of universal childhood desires
Right.
that he believed often find expression in our dreams in symbolic ways. He argued that the lasting impact and emotional resonance of the tragedy of Oedipus Tyrannus lie in our own unconscious recognition of these primal, though often repressed, impulses.
So our dreams can be seen as a kind of stage where these fundamental and often complex family dynamics play out in symbolic form.
In a symbolic way, yes. He then provides more direct and less veiled examples of wish fulfillment, such as the simple case of a young boy dreaming vividly of eating roast meat after being denied dinner.
Simple punishment, simple dream fix.
Pretty much. A very direct fulfillment of a basic physiological need in the dream.
Simple and to the point. Hunger in waking life leads to a feast in the dream world.
Exactly. He also discusses what he termed dreams of dental irritation in men.
Teeth falling out again.
Right, linking them through his later insights and clinical experience to repressed unconscious urges related to masturbation.
Oh, really? That's specific.
Yeah, a connection he came to understand more fully after encountering significant resistance to other interpretations of these dreams.
So that common dream of your teeth falling out might not always be a straightforward symbol of anxiety or loss.
According to Freud's later refinements, particularly for men's dreams, it could very well be connected to these underlying and often repressed desires. Then he revisits flying dreams,
Okay.
offering a compelling connection to the physical sensations and joys of childhood play, like being lifted up and rocked in the air.
That makes sense.
The adult dream of flying often omits the presence of the supporting hands, which can then lead to the sensation of free-floating or even falling.
That feeling of soaring in a dream might be a residual unconscious memory of being held and lifted as a young child. That's a rather beautiful and evocative connection.
It is. He then delves into the symbolic interpretation of landscapes and familiar geographical locations in dreams,
How so?
proposing that these can often represent the mother's genital organ,
Whoa.
a place that, in a fundamental sense, we have all been before our birth.
Whoa, that's a deep and quite primal symbolic interpretation.
He extends this line of symbolic thinking to dreams that involve narrow spaces like tunnels or caves or the presence of water, which he interprets as potentially symbolizing the experience of embryonic life within the womb and the process of birth itself.
The journey through the mother's body.
Right.
The watery depths of our unconscious mirroring our earliest and most fundamental environment.
That's the underlying idea. He then proceeds to provide a wider range of other commonly observed dream symbols and their proposed interpretations. Children, often representing genitals.
Okay.
Various flying machines symbolizing male genitals, playing with a child representing onanism, right and left, often carrying ethical connotations.
Right versus wrong.
Yeah. And even close relatives potentially symbolizing one's own genitals. He also mentions Stekel's work on bisexual symbolism, but expresses caution regarding its universal applicability.
Right.
It's like unlocking a hidden lexicon of the unconscious.
It really is like learning a whole new dictionary to try and decipher the hidden language of our dreams.
Precisely. He then meticulously details the complex dream of the tin sheet, offering a compelling example of how seemingly random dream elements can, through layers of symbolic association, connect to significant personal experiences, internal moral conflicts, and deeply repressed desires.
Like what?
Including associations with his father's business dealings, feelings of commercial dishonesty, and unconscious urges related to onanism.
It's an incredibly intricate web of interconnected associations that he's uncovering within this single dream.
It truly highlights the depth and complexity that Freud believed lay beneath the surface of even seemingly nonsensical dreams. He then reemphasizes how seemingly indifferent events from the
Day residues again.
right, can become central elements within a dream through their often unconscious associations with more personally significant concerns. He uses the example of the botanical monograph dream,
Okay.
where a casual observation triggered a chain of associations linked to professional ambitions and underlying anxieties.
So the seemingly trivial trigger can unlock a whole network of related, often emotionally charged thoughts and feelings in the dream.
Exactly. He then discusses how spatial elements within dreams, particularly above and below, can often point to unconscious sexual fantasies.
Spatial symbolism.
Yeah, another layer of symbolic meaning embedded in the spatial orientation of the dream narrative.
Another layer of symbolic meaning tied to our physical orientation within the dream world.
He then briefly revisits the crucial concepts of dream condensation and displacement
Right, the core mechanism.
as fundamental mechanisms of dream work. They're the ways the unconscious compresses and shifts emotional intensity and meaning as they're transformed into the manifest dream content. He again promises a more detailed explanation later.
It's as if the unconscious has its own sophisticated editing suite, compressing vast amounts of information and subtly rearranging the emotional emphasis.
Precisely. He explains how dreams often represent causal relationships not through explicit logic, but through the sequence of images or events.
One thing after another implies cause.
Right. One following another. He also describes how dreams tend to handle either-or scenarios by often combining both possibilities into a single composite image or event.
So instead of presenting this or that, the dream often presents this and that simultaneously.
Exactly. The dream also has a peculiar way of dealing with negation. The concept of no doesn't seem to operate the same way.
Oh, no.
Pretty much. Antitheses and contradictions are frequently reduced to unity or even represented by substituting one for the other. He uses the vivid example of a dream with a blossoming twig that symbolized both sexual innocence and its opposite.
The dream seems to embrace ambiguity and paradox in a way that our conscious minds often resist.
Indeed. He goes on to explain how dreams represent people through identification, where one person stands in for another, or through composition, combining features of multiple people. He also strongly asserts his belief that all dreams are ultimately egotistical. Meaning they fundamentally concern the dreamer's own ego and psychological state, even when other people appear prominently.
So even when you're dreaming about someone else entirely, the dream is still, on a deeper level, about you.
That's Freud's contention. He also discusses how specific places in dreams can be symbolic or represent entirely different real-world locations based on shared desired features or emotional associations.
Right.
Using his own dream involving Rome and Prague as an example.
One place in the dream acting as a stand-in for another based on some shared, often unconscious characteristic or feeling.
Precisely. He proposes that the parts of a dream felt most intensely are often those involving the greatest condensation of underlying dream thoughts.
Where the most meaning is packed in.
Exactly. Where multiple ideas and emotions are compressed. However, he cautions against assuming that a dream that feels particularly clear is structurally any different from a more bizarre one.
Clarity can be deceptive.
Yeah. He uses his bisexuality theory recitation dream as an example where the feeling of clarity was actually part of the underlying wish fulfillment.
So a dream that feels very clear and logical on the surface isn't necessarily a simple dream in terms of its underlying structure and meaning.
Exactly. He introduces the biblical story of Pharaoh's dreams as a classic example of how multiple, seemingly disparate dream images can collectively convey a single, unified, underlying meaning.
Look for the overarching message.
Right. He further explains how events happening simultaneously within a dream can often represent conditional, if-when, relationships in the underlying dream thoughts.
Even if not explicitly stated.
Exactly. Even though these relationships might not be explicitly stated in the dream narrative.
The dream seems to employ its own unique kind of visual grammar to express complex logical relationships.
Precisely. He then explores the common sensation of impeded movement in dreams.
Feeling stuck, yeah.
Linking it initially to exhibitionistic desires, but also suggesting a broader representational purpose beyond simple motor paralysis during sleep.
So more symbolic weight.
Right. That frustrating feeling likely carries a deeper symbolic weight.
That frustrating feeling of being stuck or unable to move in a dream might have a more profound symbolic meaning than just a physiological quirk of sleep.
It likely does. He uses the somewhat peculiar dream of the opera with the tower conductor to illustrate how dream figures can be composite creations.
Mixing people up.
Yeah, blending traits of different people the dreamer knows, and also how verbal puns and wordplay can subtly influence the dream's construction.
Wordplay.
Yeah, the unconscious mind even plays with language in its own way.
The unconscious mind even seems to have a sense of humor playing with words in our dreams.
It appears so. He emphasizes that the dream's characteristic methods of substitution and symbolic representation often follow pre-existing pathways and associations within our unconscious thinking.
Right.
Drawing a connection between these dream processes and the mechanisms underlying wit and neurotic fantasies. He then revisits Scherner's theory of body symbolism.
The body as a house, etc.
Exactly, where the dreamer's body is often symbolically represented through imagery of houses, plants, even kitchen items, often serving as disguised representations of sexual themes.
The familiar world around us transforming into a metaphorical landscape of our own bodies and unconscious desires.
That's the core idea. He demonstrates how abstract concepts, things not easily visualized, can be represented in dreams through concrete imagery and wordplay.
Like?
Using the example of the superfluous dream involving dripping water to illustrate this point. He also explains that numbers in dreams aren't necessarily mathematical,
Okay.
but can often serve as allusions to unrepresentable material or be combined playfully.
Even numbers have their own unique logic and potential meaning within the context of a dream.
It seems so. He addresses the presence of seemingly intellectual or rational elements in dreams, like calculations or logical arguments,
Right, dreams that feel smart.
suggesting that even these serve the underlying function of wish fulfillment, perhaps by providing a sense of mastery or justification. He then tackles the often perplexing issue of absurdity in dreams.
Why are dreams so weird sometimes?
Right, arguing that it frequently arises from the faithful, albeit sometimes unsettling, representation of unusual thought processes or permissible speech patterns that we often ignore in waking life.
Okay.
Using the rather surprising example of a post-mortem bowel movement, dream, to illustrate this point.
So, what appears nonsensical in a dream might actually be a direct reflection of a different kind of logic operating in our unconscious.
Exactly. He further explains that seemingly contradictory or puzzling elements within a dream often hold specific meanings related to the underlying dream thoughts.
Like clues.
Yeah, using the complex example of the one-horse carriage on the railway line dream as a detailed illustration. He also demonstrates how dreams can actively process recent interpersonal experiences and emotions.
Dealing with the day's interactions.
Right. Even negative emotions like hostility, using the example of the dream about the former colleague whose attitude had changed.
Dreams acting as a kind of mental processing space for our daily interactions and the feelings they evoke.
Precisely. He analyzes the recurring dream of being late for something important.
The late for the exam dream.
That kind of thing. Connecting it to underlying feelings of guilt, a sense of failure, or unresolved issues in the dreamer's waking life. He reiterates the central idea that even unpleasant dreams
The bad ones.
can ultimately be traced back to wish fulfillment, using the self-critical Taylor poet dream as a more complex example.
So even the bad dreams, the ones that leave us feeling uneasy, might still be serving some underlying psychological purpose related to our desires or anxieties.
That's the core tenet of his theory. He revisits the concept of the dream censor,
The internal editor again.
emphasizing its critical role in distorting unacceptable unconscious wishes and suggesting that seemingly harmless surface content can often mask deeper, more troubling desires.
Disguises.
Exactly, that the censor has worked to disguise. He then addresses the common feeling of accelerated thought within dreams,
Dreams feeling super fast.
proposing that this sensation might be due to the extreme condensation of a large amount of underlying thought material into a relatively brief dream narrative,
Packing it all in.
or alternatively, that the dream might be drawing upon pre-existing fantasies stored in our memory.
The dream can feel like it flashes by in an instant, yet it can contain a vast amount of emotional and symbolic information.
Exactly. He introduces the psychology of dream activities by mentioning a patient who consciously imitated an action from her dream.
Acting it out.
Yeah, signifying her unconscious agreement with its underlying meaning. He explains that during psychoanalytic analysis, anything the patient does that hinders the process is considered psychic resistance.
Okay.
He then discusses the various reasons why we tend to forget our dreams.
Why do we forget them so easily?
Primarily attributing this to the active force of the psychic censor, suggesting that the censor works to suppress the disturbing unconscious wishes the dream might reveal.
Right.
He also notes that analysis can often help recover forgotten dream content, or at least the underlying thoughts.
Forgetting our dreams as yet another defense mechanism employed by the unconscious mind.
Precisely. He explains how the censor can also cause displacement in the connections between the dream thoughts, leading to superficial or seemingly illogical associations in the manifest dream.
Making weird connections.
Yeah. He briefly returns to the early example of the burning child dream,
Okay.
highlighting the dreamer's powerful wish to see the child alive as the primary motivating factor, hinting there might be even further layers of motive.
It really does feel like peeling back the layers of an onion to get to the core, often unconscious,
Yeah.
wish driving the dream.
Exactly. He then introduces the idea of different MEM systems within the psychic apparatus and the concept of regression in dreams,
Regression.
where the mind temporarily reverts to more primitive or earlier modes of functioning. However, he clarifies that this psychological regression in dreams doesn't lead to actual real-world gratification.
Not like a real experience.
No. He connects the phenomenon of hallucinations in states like hysteria and paranoia to this regressive process, where abstract thoughts are transformed into vivid sensory images often linked to suppressed memories. He uses the striking example of the young boy's dream of green faces with red eyes
Wow.
as a clear illustration of a repressed childhood memory manifesting as a terrifying hallucination within the dream.
Dreams, in this view, can offer us a glimpse into these more primal and regressive modes of thought that we've largely moved beyond in our waking lives.
Precisely. He then addresses the significant challenge that anxiety dreams pose to his theory of wish fulfillment.
Right, because they don't feel wish-fulfilling.
Exactly. Acknowledging that anxiety itself is a separate, complex issue belonging to the broader psychology of neuroses, he briefly mentions his intention to analyze anxiety dreams specifically for their potential underlying sexual content.
So even anxiety dreams might link back to desire somehow.
That's what he suggests, that even these seemingly negative dreams have roots in unconscious desires. He revisits the father's solicitude dream, the one about the fire, raising the question of whether it is primarily a straightforward wish fulfillment or perhaps a continuation of waking thoughts triggered by a subtle sensory impression during sleep.
The interplay between the fundamental drive of wish fulfillment and other ongoing mental processes during sleep seems to be quite intricate.
It's a complex interaction indeed. He reiterates the idea that distorted dreams ultimately derive their motivating wishes from the unconscious mind,
Right.
but raises the question of whether simple, unfulfilled wishes from the day are truly sufficient to trigger the often elaborate dreams of adults,
Need something deeper.
suggesting that deeper, more intense, and often infantile wishes might be necessary to fuel them. However, he confirms that the seemingly indifferent remnants of the day's experiences
The day residues.
do often serve as the immediate triggers that set a dream in motion, which then attempts to preserve sleep by fulfilling an underlying wish.
So the day's seemingly insignificant events might provide the spark, but the underlying fuel and direction of the dream come from our deeper, often unconscious desires.
That's the core of the idea. He then poses a central and fundamental question. Why is it that the unconscious mind seems capable of driving this process of wish fulfillment primarily during sleep?
Okay, question.
He states that the answer lies in a deeper understanding of the psychic nature of wishes and promises to explain this using his developing model of the mind. Finally, he contrasts the primitive primary process,
Okay.
characterized by a drive for immediate gratification through hallucination and wish fulfillment, as seen in dreams and psychoses,
Right.
with the more mature and reality-oriented secondary process of waking thought, which involves logic, planning, and delaying gratification.
Waking versus dreaming mind.
Exactly. He argues that the dream offers us a fascinating glimpse into this earlier and largely abandoned primary mode of mental functioning.
Dreams, in this final perspective, offer us a kind of window into an earlier, more primal way our minds operate.
Precise.
Wow, that was an incredibly thorough deep dive into Freud's early and foundational ideas on the interpretation of dreams. So, to bring it all together, we've seen how he shifted the understanding of dreams.
Yeah.
From divine communications to meaningful psychic events deeply rooted in our waking experiences, our internal physical states, and most importantly, our often unconscious wishes.
Exactly. And we've explored some of the surprising and remarkably intricate mechanisms of what he called dream work.
Right. Condensation, displacement.
Things like the use of symbolism, the processes of condensation and displacement that function to disguise and transform these underlying wishes into the dream narratives we experience. It's clearly far more than just, random replay.
Or meaningless neural firings.
Definitely.
And it's so clear that what we've covered today is really just the initial exploration of the incredibly complex and continually evolving theories that Freud presented in the interpretation of dreams.
Absolutely. This was a look at the fundamental building blocks of his theory. And as he himself noted in the prefaces to those later editions we examined, his thinking continued to develop and become more nuanced over time.
So as you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps you might find yourself pondering how your own dreams connect with the events of your day.
Mm-hmm.
Those hidden desires that might be lurking beneath the surface of your awareness, and maybe even those long-forgotten echoes from your earliest childhood. Could your dreams be offering you a unique kind of shortcut, maybe?
Yeah.
A more direct route, as it were, to understanding the often mysterious landscape of your own inner world. Certainly a fascinating prospect to consider.
It really is.
And if this exploration has sparked your curiosity, there is a vast and intricate universe of psychoanalytic concepts out there just waiting to be further explored. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us.